They seemed like the kind of couple you'd find in a home decor magazine, the kind who hosted dinner parties where the wine was always perfectly paired and the conversation flowed easily. Friends called them relationship goals. Neighbors waved as they left for morning jogs together. Family members pointed to them as proof that lasting love still existed. But beneath the brass house numbers and the freshly painted shutters, behind the door that always opened with a smile, there was a room no one knew about. A basement that wasn't on any blueprint. And inside it, a secret so carefully constructed, so meticulously hidden, that when it was finally discovered, it didn't just shatter one marriage. It shattered the fundamental assumptions of everyone who thought they knew what a perfect life looked like. Their names were David and Catherine Marlowe, though some details have been altered to protect those still processing what happened. They lived in a suburb 40 minutes outside of Portland, in one of those neighborhoods where people actually knew their neighbors, where block parties happened every summer and holiday decorations were a subtle competition. They'd been married for 11 years, no children, which they explained as a mutual choice, a decision to focus on their careers and each other. David worked in finance, something vague involving investment portfolios that most people nodded along to without fully understanding. Catherine was a speech therapist at an elementary school, beloved by students and parents alike. She had that warm, patient energy that made children feel safe. People trusted her instinctively. To the outside world, they had it all figured out. They took vacations to places like Tuscany and the Amalfi Coast, posting tasteful photos that never felt like showing off. They renovated their kitchen with subway tiles and butcher block counters. They attended charity galas and donated generously. Catherine volunteered at the local animal shelter. David coached the youth soccer team on weekends. They were the couple other couples wanted to be. The kind of marriage that made single people believe in partnership and made struggling couples wonder what they were doing wrong. But if you paid close attention, if you looked past the surface just slightly, there were small things that didn't quite fit. Catherine's friends noticed she never invited anyone over spontaneously. Every gathering was planned weeks in advance, always in specific rooms of the house. The living room, the kitchen, the back patio. Never upstairs. Never into certain parts of the first floor. When someone once asked to use a bathroom and started walking toward the hall, Catherine redirected them with such sudden firmness that it startled everyone. She laughed it off immediately, explaining that bathroom had a plumbing issue, but the moment lingered. Similarly, David had a way of controlling conversations that felt almost imperceptible until you thought about it later. He would ask questions, express interest, steer discussions away from certain topics with such smooth precision that you didn't realize you'd been guided until the evening was over and you'd somehow talked about yourself for 3 hours without learning anything meaningful about him. Their neighbors, the Fentons, mentioned once that they'd never been inside the Marlowe house, despite living next door for 7 years. They'd been invited to backyard barbecues, had shared drinks on the porch, but never crossed the threshold. When Mrs. Fenton brought it up to her book club, another member admitted the same thing. So did a third. It became a running joke. The mysterious Marlowe interior. Everyone assumed it was just a quirk, maybe a privacy thing. Maybe Catherine was particular about her decorating. No one thought it meant anything. Why would they? The Marlowes were lovely. They were normal. They were safe. Behind the closed door of their home, the dynamic was different. Not dramatically so. Not in ways that would make for obvious warning signs, but different nonetheless. Catherine moved through the house with a certain careful awareness, as if mentally tracking where David was at all times. She kept the kitchen spotless, not in the way someone who enjoys cleaning does, but in the way someone following a strict protocol does. Dinner was always ready at 6:15. The mail was sorted by 5:30. The thermostat stayed at exactly 70 degrees. She had routines for everything, and when those routines were disrupted, even slightly, a tension would settle over the house that neither of them acknowledged aloud. David was particular about certain spaces, The basement door located off the kitchen was always locked. Catherine had never questioned it. Early in their marriage, he'd explained it was his workshop, his private space for projects and hobbies, and she'd accepted that without resistance. Everyone needs something that's just theirs, she'd thought. It seemed reasonable, healthy even. He went down there most evenings after dinner, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 3. She could hear him moving around, the sound of furniture being shifted, occasionally a faint hum that might have been machinery. She never asked what he was working on. He never offered to show her. And somehow, over 11 years, that locked door became so normalized that it stopped registering as unusual. But there were moments when Catherine felt something she couldn't name. Late at night, lying in bed while David was still in the basement, she would stare at the ceiling and feel a cold thread of unease wind through her chest. She told herself it was anxiety, stress from work, maybe hormones. She never let herself follow the thought to its logical conclusion. Because if she did, if she really examined the feeling, she'd have to confront questions she wasn't ready to ask. Why was the basement door always locked? Why had she never once been invited down there? Why did David sometimes come upstairs with dirt under his fingernails when the basement was supposedly finished and carpeted? Why did he shower immediately after, every single time, as if washing away evidence of something she wasn't meant to know about? The discovery happened on a Tuesday in March. David was at a conference in Seattle, his first overnight trip in months. Catherine had the house to herself, a rare occurrence that should have felt relaxing. Instead, she felt restless. She tried to read. She tried to watch television. But her mind kept circling back to that locked door. It was ridiculous, she told herself. She'd lived in this house for over a decade. There was no reason to suddenly become suspicious of a basement she'd never cared about before. Except she had cared. She'd just taught herself not to. At 9:30 that night, she made a decision that would change everything. She went to David's office, opened his desk drawer, and found the keyring he kept hidden under a stack of old tax documents. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was a violation of trust, she thought. This was crossing a line. But she took the keys anyway. She walked to the kitchen. She stood in front of that basement door for a full 5 minutes, key in hand, trying to convince herself to either use it or put it back. In the end, the not knowing was worse than any potential argument about privacy. She unlocked the door, she turned on the light, and she descended the stairs into a space that should not have existed. The basement was larger than it should have been. That was the first thing that struck her. The house's footprint didn't account for this much space. Which meant David had expanded it at some point, dug deeper, built out, and done it all without permits, without her knowledge, without leaving any trace of construction. The walls were soundproofed with foam panels. The floor was concrete, spotless, recently cleaned. There was a large metal table in the center, the kind you might see in a medical examiner's office. Shelves lined one wall, meticulously organized with supplies that made Catherine's stomach drop. Restraints, tarps, industrial cleaning chemicals, a camera on a tripod pointed at the table, and filing cabinets, 4 of them, locked. Catherine stood at the bottom of those stairs for what felt like an eternity, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. This wasn't a workshop. This wasn't a hobby space. This was something planned, something built with purpose, something that required time and money and absolute secrecy. She wanted to run. She wanted to unsee it. But she also knew, with a certainty that made her knees weak, that she had to know what was in those filing cabinets. She tried the keys. The third one worked. The drawer slid open, and inside were folders, dozens of them, each labeled with a date and a name. She pulled one out at random. Inside were photographs, not of people, of places, empty parking lots, hiking trails, rest stops along highways. Each photo marked with a time stamp and notes in David's neat handwriting. Observations about foot traffic, lighting, security cameras. She pulled out another folder, more photographs, this time of a woman Catherine didn't recognize, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. The woman at a grocery store, at a gas station, getting into her car. The dates spanned 3 months. The most recent photo was from 2 weeks ago. Catherine's vision blurred. She gripped the filing cabinet to steady herself. She opened another drawer. More folders, more names, more surveillance, some going back years. What no one realized at the time, what even Catherine didn't fully understand in that moment, was that she was standing in the archive of a man who had been planning something for a very long time. The basement wasn't the scene of a crime. It was the preparation. The meticulous, obsessive preparation of someone who believed he could execute something without getting caught. The photos weren't trophies. They were research. The equipment wasn't for use. It was for readiness. David had built this space, gathered these materials, and tracked these people with the patience of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. And if Catherine hadn't opened that door, if she'd waited even one more month, the basement might have transitioned from planning to action. She called the police at 10:47 that night. Her voice was surprisingly calm when the dispatcher answered, though her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the phone. She said she needed officers to come to her house. She said she'd found something in her basement. She said she didn't think her husband was who she thought he was. The dispatcher kept her on the line, asking questions, trying to assess the situation. Catherine answered mechanically, still standing in that basement, unable to make herself go back upstairs. When the officers arrived 12 minutes later, she unlocked the front door and led them straight down. She didn't explain. She just pointed at the filing cabinets and said, "Look." The investigation that followed moved with shocking speed. Within hours, David's hotel room in Seattle was searched. His car was impounded. His computer was seized. His phone records were subpoenaed. And with each new piece of evidence, the portrait of David Marlowe shifted from respectable finance professional to something far more disturbing. The photos in the basement were cross-referenced with missing persons reports. 3 of the women he'd been surveilling had disappeared in the past 2 years. 1 was still missing. The others had been found dead, their cases unsolved, their murders attributed to random violence or abduction by unknown assailants. Investigators now had a suspect. They had a pattern. They had evidence of premeditation. What they didn't have was enough proof to charge him with murder. Not yet. David was arrested at the conference hotel at 6 in the morning. He didn't resist. He didn't lawyer up immediately. Instead, he asked a single question that chilled everyone who heard it. He asked if Catherine was okay. Not whether she was safe, not whether she was angry or scared, but whether she was okay, as if his primary concern, even in the moment of his arrest, was maintaining the illusion of being a caring husband. When detectives told him they'd found the basement, his expression didn't change. He simply nodded as if confirming something he'd already known was inevitable. Then he asked for an attorney and stopped talking. The story broke in the local news within 24 hours. A respected financial advisor, a beloved school therapist, a hidden basement, photos of potential victims. The community was in shock. People who'd known the Marlowes for years suddenly found themselves questioning every interaction they'd ever had. Had David been sizing them up? Had Catherine known? How could she not have known? The scrutiny on Catherine was immediate and brutal. Some people defended her, arguing she was clearly a victim herself, deceived and manipulated by someone who'd spent over a decade perfecting his facade. Others were less generous, insisting she must have suspected something, that willful ignorance was its own form of complicity. Catherine herself disappeared from public view. She moved out of the house the day after David's arrest, staying with her sister 2 states away. She cooperated fully with investigators, answering every question, submitting to multiple interviews, providing access to her own devices and records. They found nothing implicating her. Her search history was clean, her communications were mundane, Her finances showed no unusual transactions. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. She genuinely had no idea. She'd lived with a man who was planning serial murder, and she hadn't known. The realization destroyed her in ways that were hard to articulate. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the fundamental shattering of her ability to trust her own perception. If she could be that wrong about someone she slept next to every night, what else had she been wrong about? How could she ever trust her judgment again? As the investigation deepened, more disturbing details emerged. David had been using his work trips as opportunities to scout locations and potential victims in different cities. He'd created multiple email accounts under false names. He'd rented storage units in 3 different states, all paid for in cash, all containing similar equipment to what was found in the basement. He'd been building towards something for at least 5 years, maybe longer, and he'd done it all while maintaining the appearance of a normal, successful, happily married man. He'd coached soccer games on Saturday mornings and then spent Saturday nights researching abduction techniques. He donated to children's charities and simultaneously compiled lists of isolated hiking trails where bodies might never be found. The psychology of it fascinated and horrified investigators. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't someone who snapped under pressure. This was methodical, calculated, and patient. David had demonstrated an ability to compartmentalize that bordered on pathological. He could be charming at a dinner party while mentally cataloging which guests would be easy targets. He could listen to Catherine talk about her day while planning his next surveillance trip. He existed in 2 realities simultaneously, and he'd shown no signs of the cognitive dissonance that would cripple most people attempting the same thing. When detectives reviewed his computer files, they found journals, hundreds of pages of meticulous notes detailing his thoughts, his plans, his observations. He wrote about the women he'd been watching with a clinical detachment that made the text read more like a research paper than a confession. He analyzed their routines, their vulnerabilities, their social connections. He rated them on various criteria, assigning numerical values to factors like visibility, risk level, and ease of access. And he wrote about Catherine. Long passages about how maintaining the marriage was essential to his long-term success. How a single man might attract suspicion, but a married man with a stable home life was above reproach. He referred to her as his cover, his legitimacy. He wrote that he cared for her, in his way, but that her primary value was functional. She was the reason no one looked at him twice. Reading those passages was what finally broke Catherine's silence. She agreed to a single televised interview, her face obscured, her voice altered. She spoke quietly, carefully, about the experience of learning that the person you loved most in the world had been using you as camouflage for evil. She talked about the guilt, the irrational but persistent belief that she should have known, that she should have seen something. She talked about the violation of realizing that every moment of intimacy, every shared laugh, every quiet morning drinking coffee together had been built on a lie so profound it retroactively poisoned every memory. And she talked about the fear that would never fully leave her, the fear that David had been capable of this, that he'd lived with her for 11 years without ever fully revealing himself, meant that anyone could be hiding anything. That trust, once shattered this completely, might never be restored. The trial was set for the following year. David's attorneys built a defense around the argument that planning wasn't the same as action, that thoughts weren't crimes, that the surveillance photos could be explained as a photography hobby, however creepy. But the prosecution had more than photos. They had the storage units, they had the journals, they had the testimony of women who'd been followed and hadn't reported it, because they'd convinced themselves they were being paranoid. They had forensic evidence linking David to locations where victims had last been seen, and they had the basement itself, preserved exactly as Catherine had found it, a physical manifestation of intent so clear it was difficult to argue away. David never took the stand. His attorneys advised against it, knowing that his affect, his inability to feign appropriate emotion, would sink him. Instead, they tried to negotiate a plea deal. In exchange for revealing the locations of bodies that had never been found, they offered a life sentence instead of the death penalty. The prosecution accepted. David provided coordinates. Remains were recovered. Families finally had answers, though the answers brought more pain than closure. And David Marlowe, the man who'd seemed so normal, so trustworthy, so perfectly unremarkable, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the story didn't end with the sentencing. In the months and years that followed, more pieces of the puzzle emerged. Former co-workers remembered comments David had made that seemed innocuous at the time, but took on sinister weight in hindsight. A joke about how easy it would be to disappear. A casual observation about security camera blind spots. A passing remark about how people trust appearances too much. His soccer team parents recalled how he always volunteered to drive kids home if their parents were running late, and how he knew everyone's schedule, everyone's routines. None of it had seemed wrong in the moment. All of it felt sickening in retrospect. Catherine's therapist, speaking anonymously in a professional journal, wrote about the unique trauma of discovering that your entire life has been a performance staged by someone else. She described Catherine's struggle to rebuild a sense of self when the foundation of that self had been constructed around a relationship that was fundamentally fraudulent. How do you trust new people when the person you trusted most betrayed you in the most profound way imaginable? How do you enter a room without analyzing everyone for hidden motives? How do you sleep in a house that doesn't have locks on every door? The therapist noted that Catherine's recovery would be measured not in months, but in years, possibly decades, and that some parts of her might never fully heal. The house on Fairview Drive, the one with the brass numbers and the cheerful shutters, sat empty for 2 years before finally being sold at a significant loss. The new owners gutted the interior, including the basement, as if demolishing the physical space could somehow exorcise what had happened there. Neighbors slowly stopped talking about it, at least overtly, though the story remained a reference point. When someone seemed a little too perfect, a little too controlled, someone would inevitably whisper, "Remember the Marlowes." It became shorthand for the danger of assuming that surface pleasantness equated to safety. And Catherine, wherever she is now, lives with the knowledge that she was married to a monster and never knew it, that she kissed him goodnight while he dreamed of murder, that she planned a future with someone who was meticulously planning to take futures away from others, that she was both victim and unwitting accomplice, guilty of nothing except believing in the person she loved. There's no resolution to that kind of trauma, no moment when it suddenly makes sense. There's only the slow, painful process of learning to live with uncertainty, of accepting that you can never fully know another person, and that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who've mastered the art of seeming safe. The basement is gone now. The files are sealed in evidence storage. David sits in a cell, having given up the right to appeal. But the questions remain. How many other basements are there? How many other seemingly perfect marriages hide something dark in their foundations? How many people are living with partners they don't really know, who've constructed elaborate facades that might not crack until it's far too late? These aren't comfortable questions. They don't have reassuring answers, but they're worth asking. Because the alternative, the belief that we can always spot the warning signs, that evil announces itself clearly, that monsters look like monsters, is a dangerous fiction. The truth is far more unsettling. The truth is that David Marlowe looked exactly like someone you'd trust, and that's precisely what made him so dangerous.